For cycles, the hum of the alien prison ship was a lullaby of despair. Cold, unyielding steel. Recycled air that tasted of dust and recycled hope. Then came the sound. Not the usual thrum of a patrol, or the hiss of a waste chute. This was different. A deep, resonant tremor, vibrating through the deck plates, rattling bones. It wasn't just the ship. It was bone. Every human prisoner in cell block Gamma felt it, a low, growing rumble that was less a sound and more a gut feeling. It was the bell, finally ringing, signaling something immense. Something new. Imagine, if you can, the raw, visceral anticipation. Weeks, months, maybe even years, of silent suffering, of being treated like little more than biological waste. The Vithar, those insectoid behemoths with their multi-jointed limbs and chitinous plates, had long grown complacent. They saw their human captives as broken things, fit only for labor, for observation. But what they missed, what they consistently underestimated, was the quiet rage that simmered beneath the surface of every single one of those so-called broken things. Inside the cells of Block Gamma, the tremor intensified, a prelude to the Vithar's routine inspection. But this time, it was different. This time, the humans knew. They'd spent uncounted cycles turning their sterile steel boxes into something else entirely. Every loose panel, every discarded piece of composite alloy, every stiffened fabric scrap from their uniforms, it had all been repurposed. Wires from diagnostic ports became trip hazards. Sharpened shivs from nutrient paste containers were taped under bunks, and the very doors themselves, once symbols of their confinement, were now something far more devious. The low thrumming reached its peak, a high-pitched whine that grated on the teeth. And then, the clank. The unmistakable sound of an external locking mechanism disengaging. A Vithar patrol, 3 strong, was approaching. Footfalls, heavy and deliberate, echoed down the corridor, their multifaceted eyes scanning the silent cells. The leading guard, a particularly brutish specimen known as Clacker, for its irritating vocalizations, reached the first cell. Its clawed appendage hovered over the release panel. No human stirred. No one spoke. Their faces were masks of placid, defeated resignation, just as the Vitar expected. But behind those eyes, the sparks were catching, igniting a fire that had been banked for far too long. Each man and woman stood ready, muscles tensed, breath held. The air itself seemed to crackle with the unspoken pact. Then, with a hiss of pneumatics, the cell doors of Block Gamma slid open. Not just one, but a coordinated ripple, all down the length of the corridor. The Vithar guards took a collective, almost arrogant, step forward, their plasma rifles at rest. They expected compliant, pathetic figures. They expected another boring inspection. What they found instead was a wall. A solid, improvised barrier of reinforced bunk frames, scavenged plating, and tightly woven synth cloth, all jammed into the door frames from the inside, fortified with 100 desperate hands. The Vithar froze, their alien senses struggling to process the impossible. Their prisoners, their broken prisoners, had turned their cages into bunkers. What in the... Clacker's vocalizer buzzed with confusion, a sound quickly cut short as the first razor-sharp ceramic shiv, launched from the dark maw of a cell, buried itself deep into its exposed neck joint. Its legs buckled. From every open cell a flurry of motion erupted. Makeshift spears jabbed. Tripwires snapped taut, sending the other Vithar sprawling onto the grated floor. The lights in the corridor flickered, then died, plunged into an inky blackness. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic, alien and raw, erupted from the Vithar ranks. The prisoners, now warriors, moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency born of shared suffering and a singular, desperate goal. The sudden, impossible darkness in cell block Gamma wasn't just an absence of light. It was a sensory weapon. One moment the sterile glow of the Vithar corridor, the next a suffocating absolute void, punctuated by the high-pitched shriek of the wounded, clacker guard. Plasma bolts, wild and undirected, seared through the black, cauterizing air with their terrible heat, sometimes striking the very walls the Vithar were sworn to protect, sometimes finding unintended targets among their own panicked ranks. Remember, these Vithar, these meticulous overlords, based their entire security protocol on a simple, deeply flawed premise: observation equals understanding. They watched humans, cataloged their suffering, noted their lack of conventional weaponry, and concluded they were inherently docile, manageable, easily broken. A classic, deadly syllogism: prisoners are passive, humans are prisoners, therefore humans are passive. They observed bodies, not minds. They documented reactions, not resilience. And now, that grand miscalculation was tearing through their ranks like a physical force. In the pitch black, human voices, sharp and clear, cut through the alien chatter. Stay low, press the advantage, keep them separated. No more whispered defiance. This was direct, coordinated action. The men and women, who had been deemed too weak, too insignificant to pose a threat, moved with the predatory grace of creatures suddenly unleashed. They knew the floor plan. They knew the obstacles they'd placed. They knew where the Vaffer didn't expect them to be. One Futhar, its multifaceted eyes useless in the sudden gloom, stumbled over a cleverly placed tripwire, a reinforced comms cable stretched taut between two cell doors. It hit the deck plates with a sickening thud, its heavy armor clattering. Before it could even orient itself, a dozen hands were on it, tearing at weak points in its chitin, leveraging its own bulk against it. A repurposed bed frame, its sharp edges honed, slammed down, then another. The alien struggles were short, choked. From a command console deeper in the FOTA prison structure, a senior overseer, designated Unit 907, watched the feed flicker, then die, leaving only garbled audio. Report. What is happening in Gamma Block? Stabilize the security grid. Its vocalizer buzzed with irritation, not fear. Humans were incapable of such complex, aggressive defiance. This had to be a malfunction. Or, perhaps, an escaped rogue xenomorph that had somehow bypassed multiple internal sensors. Anything but fire them. But the sounds told a different story. The rhythmic thud of blunt force. The strangled gurgles of its subordinates. The rising, desperate alien cries for aid. And beneath it all, the chilling, almost joyous grunts of human exertion. These weren't the whimpers of the defeated. These were the battle cries of the newly freed. The humans weren't just reacting. They were improvising, adapting. When a Vithar managed to get off a burst of plasma fire, illuminating a small section of the corridor, human prisoners didn't flee. They used the momentary light to pinpoint the source, then melted back into the darkness, only to reappear moments later, striking from unexpected angles. They were a swarm, a current, a tide of pure, unadulterated will. The Overseer's internal data processors whirred, attempting to reconcile observed data with unexpected outcome. It simply couldn't. Its entire observational data set on human behavior indicated compliance. Yet the audio stream now suggested utter, brutal non-compliance. It was a cognitive dissonance that would prove fatal. Because even the most precise observation, when interpreted through a lens of arrogance, remains fatally, spectacularly blind. The emergency lighting, when it finally flickered on, wasn't a comforting beacon. It was a hellish strobe, pulsing red and sickly yellow, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every struggling alien movement. It exposed the Vithar for what they were now, panicked targets, caught in a trap of their own complacent design. That's the thing about prey. When you keep them in a cage long enough, they learn every bar, every weakness, every angle of attack. And sometimes, just sometimes, they learn how to turn the cage on the hunter. In the center of the corridor, a Vithar guard thrashed, its multi-jointed legs scrabbling uselessly against the slick floor. It wasn't just blood. a noxious, chemical-smelling fluid, repurposed from the ship's own cleaning supplies, sprayed from a ruptured internal organ, making the already treacherous surface a death trap. Two of its comrades tried to pull it free, but the flailing alien, disoriented and wounded, only lashed out blindly, its plasma rifle discharging a wild, uncontrolled burst that incinerated a section of wall paneling, showering them all in molten shrapnel. From within the reinforced shadows of Cell 7, Elias, a former combat engineer, peered through a narrow slit he'd painstakingly carved into the barricade. He watched the alien panic unfold, a grim satisfaction tightening his jaw. "They're not even thinking, just reacting," he murmured to Lena, a former medic, who was quietly sharpening another length of scavenged metal. "Keep 'em bottled up. Don't push out yet." You see, this wasn't just a spontaneous uprising. This was a snare. Every fortified door, every tripwire, every precisely placed slick of lubricant or caustic fluid had been planned for cycles. They hadn't just reactivated the cell doors as barriers. They'd rigged them to jam, to buckle, to become immovable strongpoints, turning the Vorda's own prison architecture against them. They had adapted not just to survive, but to reverse the roles entirely. Another Vithar, its armored plating scorched, slammed itself against Cell 4's barricade, its desperate shrieks echoing down the corridor. "Open! Open this confinement!" It buzzed, a pathetic plea. It didn't understand. The humans didn't want the doors open. Not now. The doors were no longer holding them in Vades. They were holding the Vithar doubt, or rather, holding them trapped inside the corridor. From a higher tier of cells, a human voice, calm and clear despite the chaos, cut through the alien clamor. "Remember the vents? We still need passage." That was Marcus, the natural leader who had coordinated this entire, impossible operation. Even in the middle of their hard-won fight, the humans weren't just lashing out. They were thinking 3 steps ahead, securing escape routes, planning for the next phase. They refused to be cornered. Not again. The Vithar, blinded by their own arrogance, had built a meticulous, inescapable prison. They had observed, studied, and categorized. But they had failed to account for the one variable that defied all logic, all prediction. Human ingenuity, when pushed to the absolute breaking point. They had watched their prey, and never once considered that the prey was watching back, patiently waiting to spring its own far deadlier trap. Some cages are designed to keep you in, others to keep things out, and some by sheer human will are transformed into both. The air in Block Gamma wasn't just thick with the metallic tang of alien blood and the acrid smoke of plasma burns. It was heavy with the palpable cost of every inch gained. Every gasp, every grunt, every sickening crunch of chitin underfoot was a line item in a brutal, unspoken ledger. This wasn't a fair fight, not by any measure. It was a war of desperation, waged with sharpened rebar against advanced armor, raw human will against alien technological superiority. The humans were winning, not with strength, but with a savage calculus. One Vithar, its comms unit still faintly buzzing with static, tried to push through a breach in Cell 12's barricade. Its massive clawed hand reached in, searching for purchase for a human to seize. But the humans didn't recoil. Instead, 2 of them, moving with synchronized precision honed by countless drills, slammed a reinforced plating from above, trapping the alien limb. The Vithar shrieked, a sound like grinding stone as its joint buckled. A third human, a wiry woman named Anya, didn't hesitate. She plunged a crudely fashioned shiv, tipped with conductive wiring stripped from a power conduit, deep into the exposed underside of its elbow joint, completing a circuit. The Vithar convulsed, its shrieks replaced by a high-pitched whine as its internal systems overloaded. That's the kind of decision that gets made when you're fighting for your life. No honor, no mercy, just brutal efficiency. You exploit every weakness, use every resource, and don't flinch from doing what's necessary. It was a cold, hard, unblinking calculation, one of them for one less of us. Overseer Unit 907, still monitoring from the central command deck, finally switched its internal diagnostic protocols from malfunction to hostile incursion. The data stream, though flickering, was now undeniable. Humans, prisoners, were systematically dismantling its security forces. They weren't just fighting. They were adapting, learning on the fly. Its processors calculated the current casualty rate, the estimated rate of advance, the energy signatures of the makeshift weapons. The numbers were illogical, unprecedented. A Vithar patrol from an adjacent block, responding to the escalating alarms, finally managed to force a secondary door open at the far end of Gamma. Their heavy plasma rifles tracked across the chaotic scene, momentarily illuminated by the pulsing emergency lights. But they weren't met with a mass of fleeing prisoners. They were met with organized, dug-in resistance. "Grenade!" someone yelled from the human side, the voice hoarse but steady. It wasn't a grenade in the conventional sense. It was a repurposed nutrient paste dispenser, packed tight with volatile chemicals scavenged from the ship's sanitation systems. Its fuse, a frayed piece of ignited synth-cloth. It landed with a wet thud amongst the newly arrived Vithar, spewing noxious, corrosive gas. The aliens recoiled, their optical sensors burning, their armor steaming. The humans didn't waste the opportunity. They surged, a wave of desperate, determined fury. They were tired. They were hurt. But they remembered every humiliation, every injustice. And they were finally, brutally, settling the score. They weren't fighting to escape anymore. They were fighting to *win. There are things you learn in the dark, things you learn when you're cornered. You learn the precise angle of a killing blow, the exact moment to strike, and the brutal truth that sometimes the only way out is straight through. The initial shock, the glorious chaos of turning the tables, had faded. Now, in the flickering, dying emergency lights of cell block Gamma, there was only the grind. The raw, rasping effort of holding ground, of pushing back against an enemy that still outnumbered them, still out-teched them. Every swing of a rebar club, every thrust of a sharpened pipe, every agonizing push to reinforce a barricade, was a testament to pure, unadulterated desperation. This wasn't just a fight, it was a crucible, forging something fierce and unbreakable from human pain and terror. Listen closely. You can almost hear it. The strained breaths, the grunts of effort, the metallic clang as another piece of scavenged paneling is wrenched into place. And beneath it all, the persistent, low thrum of the prison ship, a constant reminder of their isolation, a relentless pulse beating against their dwindling hope. Their hands, once soft with days of idleness, were now raw, bloodied, calloused. Their muscles, long atrophied, screamed with exertion. But no one stopped. No one dared. Marcus, his face streaked with grime and sweat, knelt by a smoldering comms panel. He was using a modified power cell salvaged from a Vithar rifle to weld a loose bulkhead panel to the outer frame of Cell 10. Sparks flew, momentarily illuminating the exhausted faces of the others. "How much longer, Marcus?" Lena asked, her voice tight, her arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage. She was still on her feet, still moving, but the weariness in her eyes was profound. "As long as it takes, Lena," Marcus replied, his voice a low rumble. "They'll send more. Always more. But this is hours now." He tapped the welded panel. A declaration, a defiant, desperate claim of territory. The Vihar weren't retreating. They were regrouping, adapting their own tactics. The initial patrol had been annihilated, but the prison's command structure wasn't designed for failure. Alarms blared intermittently, signaling new breaches, new attempts to retake the block. From down the corridor, the distinct hiss of a Vithar plasma cutter could be heard, slowly, relentlessly, eating through the metal of a fortified door. They were trying to cut their way in, bypassing the jams the humans had rigged. Elias, moving with a limp, directed a small group to pile discarded Vithar armor plates against the threatened door. "Hold it! Keep the pressure on! If they get through here—" "We're flanked," he barked, his voice raw. He had a plasma pistol now, salvaged from one of the dead guards, its charge low, its grip still alien and awkward in his hand. But it was a sun weapon, a tangible piece of their enemy's power now turned against them. This was the forge. Every wound, every moment of fear, every impossible task they forced themselves through, was hammering them into something else. Something harder. Something unbreakable. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for the right to even try to escape. They had to survive this desperate moment, this hell, to earn the chance for another. Because in the heart of despair, a human finds something to build with, or, if necessary, to break with. In the sterile, cool confines of the VTHAR Central Command Sector 7, the screens usually displayed perfectly ordered matrices of prisoner vital signs, resource allocation, and guard patrol patterns. A symphony of efficiency, cold and precise. But now, it was a discordant cacophony. Data streams from Block Gamma were corrupted, flickering between static and distorted. Infrared images of what could only be described as absolute pandemonium. Overseer Unit 907, its multifaceted eyes fixed on the main display, felt a cold alien unease begin to seep into its processing core. This wasn't just a containment breach. This was unintelligible. The reports, when they broke through the interference, were fragmented, guttural, perimeter integrity compromised, recalibrating. No, they are asterisk inside the barricades. The audio dissolved into shrieks, then silence. Another squad gone. Another light on the tactical map extinguishing with a chilling finality. Unit 907's internal chronometer registered the passage of minutes, but it felt like cycles. Status update on secondary breach team. Unit 907 buzzed, its vocalizer betraying a rare tremor. Its subordinate, a smaller VTHAR named Subprocessor 211, frantically manipulated its console. Secondary team, engaging a fortified position near Cell 17. Plasma cutters are encountering unexpected resistance. Structural integrity of Block Gamma's interior is altered. Altered. That was the word. Not damaged, not compromised, but altered. The humans, those small, soft, ostensibly docile creatures, had taken the very architecture of their imprisonment and remade it. How? With what tools? And more importantly, why had their extensive behavioral models failed to predict this impossible uprising? The VTHAR had observed millions of hours of human activity, catalogued every sigh, every tear, every instance of compliant labor. Their conclusion was simple. Humans were tenacious survivors, yes, but ultimately they understood and accepted their place in the hierarchy. A new comms burst, clearer this time, ripped through the command center. They are using corrosives, our plating is degrading. And the lights. They're controlling the emergency grid. The voice, that of a frontline VTHAR commander, was laced with something akin to terror. Alien terror, sharp and sudden. Unit 907's optical sensors narrowed. Corrosives? From where? The prison facilities were rigorously monitored, all hazardous materials secured. And controlling the emergency grid? That required knowledge of system architecture, intricate wiring diagrams. Knowledge that no prisoner, let alone a human, should possess. They're adapting faster than our response protocols, Subprocessor 211 whispered, its limbs quivering slightly. Their actions are illogical. They are not attempting to escape the block. They are reinforcing it. Imagine that. The very creatures you deemed simple, predictable, and weak are not just fighting back, but fundamentally redesigning the battlefield from the inside. They aren't trying to flee their cage. They're turning the cage into a weapon. They are refusing to break, even when every logical pathway points to inevitable defeat. This was a nightmare of their own complacent making. The whispers began to spread among the VTHAR officers, not of strategy, but of disbelief, of growing dread. Because when your enemy defies every expectation, every logical prediction, what you're left with isn't a strategy problem. It's a fundamental, terrifying unknown. The prison comms crackled, not with the usual crisp VTHAR orders, but with something far more unsettling. Static. Thick, unnatural static, like a million tiny insects buzzing inside your head. It wasn't just a malfunction. It was pervasive, a deliberate shroud woven through the entire network of cell block Gamma. And within that shroud, the VTHAR patrol units reported whispers. Not human voices, not exactly, but phantom disturbances, fleeting echoes that vanished before they could be identified. The humans weren't just barricading their cells. They were becoming ghosts in the machine, manipulating the very sensory environment of the prison. You've got to understand, for the Vithar, control was absolute. Every square meter, every breath, every heartbeat was monitored. Their sensory arrays were designed to pick up a feather dropping. Yet, now, in the heart of their own domain, they were blind. They were deaf. The emergency lighting, still sputtering in random intervals, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the static, playing tricks on their multifaceted eyes. Every shadow seemed to shift, every silence seemed to hold a threat. A Vithar security team, 3 heavy armored units, cautiously entered a section of the corridor that had gone completely dark, its emergency lights apparently severed. Their thermal sensors, usually infallible, registered nothing but ambient warmth from the damaged walls. Anything? One buzzed. Its plasma rifle held ready, scanning the impenetrable blackness. Only static, Commander, and a residual biosignature, very faint. Gone now. That, gone now, was the terrifying part. Humans, small and soft, should have been easy to track. But these weren't just humans anymore. They were hunters, moving with an eerie silence, using the very noise of the system against its masters. They had spent cycles learning the acoustics of the block, the dead spots, the resonant frequencies. They'd turned their knowledge of their cage into a tactical advantage, using the Vithar's own system interference to mask their movements, to create false readings, to drive their enemy to distraction. From an unseen vent high above, a tiny shard of metal, sharpened to a needlepoint, dropped with barely a whisper, severing a critical power line in the Vithar's optical tracking system. The nearest guard recoiled, its vision suddenly blurring, its internal diagnostics screaming, "My optics! They are compromised!" Marcus, hidden in the labyrinthine utility tunnels beneath the cell block, watched the Vithar through a carefully bored peephole. A grim smile touched his lips. "Keep them guessing, team," he murmured into a jury-rigged comm unit, his voice barely a breath. "Every flicker, every bit of static, it's us. We're in their heads now." His words were met with a chorus of quiet, determined acknowledgments. This wasn't brute force anymore. This was psychological warfare. This was turning the hunter into the hunted. Not with open confrontation, but with fear, with uncertainty, with the chilling knowledge that you're surrounded by an enemy you can't see, can't hear, and can't predict. Because some battles are fought not with blasters and blades, but with shadows and whispers, and the unnerving silence of an unseen foe. The doctrine of chaos. It's not just about things falling apart, it's about making them fall apart in ways that serve your purpose. For the Vithar, their entire existence was built on rigid command structures, predictable responses, and perfect data. When the static and the phantom whispers turned into widespread system failures across cell block Gamma, their disciplined ranks began to fray. They moved slower, questioned orders, and, most crucially, they hesitated. And in a fight for survival, hesitation is a death sentence. Imagine a Vithar patrol, usually a picture of grim efficiency, now stumbling through a corridor where the floor unexpectedly buckles underfoot. It wasn't an explosion. It was a series of small, precisely timed detonations of scavenged gas canisters, meant to disrupt structural integrity, not destroy. The Vithar weren't just dealing with blind spots. They were dealing with a physically unstable environment, every step a potential trap. Their multi-jointed legs, designed for firm surfaces, struggled on the shifting, groaning metal. "Maintain formation. Do not deviate," buzzed a Vithar sergeant, its voice tight with frustration, barely audible over a fresh surge of static that overloaded its internal comms. But the formation was already broken. One unit, disoriented by a sudden flash of light from a rigged circuit panel, veered off, its optical sensors trying to recalibrate. It found itself alone, its plasma rifle sweeping empty air. That was the moment. From a shadowed recess, a human figure, Lena, her movements fluid and silent, emerged. She wasn't carrying a plasma rifle. She carried a length of heavy chain, ripped from a cargo hoist, weighted with scavenged components. She swung it in a wide, powerful arc, not at the Vitu's armored plates, but at its exposed leg joints, at the fragile hydraulic lines that powered its movement. The alien shrieked as its leg buckled, dropping heavily to one knee. This wasn't a fair fight. It was a brutal, asymmetric war where the humans exploited every design flaw, every alien sensory bias, every weakness they'd meticulously cataloged during their imprisonment. They weren't fighting according to Vithar rules of engagement. They were rewriting them with blood and broken tech. In the command center, Overseer Unit 907 witnessed its tactical maps dissolve into red error messages. They are not random. It buzzed, a new chilling tone entering its vocalization. The failures are coordinated. They are deliberately creating these chaotic conditions. The realization was like a physical blow. The humans weren't victims of chaos. They were its architects. They weren't just surviving. They were waging a war of calculated unpredictability. Another VTHAR patrol, split by a wall of dense corrosive smoke belching from a ruptured ventilation shaft, found themselves cut off, disoriented. And into that disorientation, the humans moved. Efficiently. Silently. A predator that thrives where others panic. Because when you strip away everything else, humans in their darkest hour don't just endure. They weaponize the wild, unpredictable storm within them. They become chaos itself. From the deepest bowels of the VTHAR prison ship, a new sound began to grow. It wasn't the chaotic cacophony of plasma fire and alien shrieks that had filled cell block Gamma for cycles. This was different. This was Dunnerum mechanical. A low, rhythmic thrumming, vibrating through the very bones of the ship, shaking the reinforced barricades the humans had so painstakingly constructed. It was the sound of a system, a massive, impersonal system, being fully engaged. The Warden's final mandate was being activated. Overseer Unit 907, from its unbreached command center, watched as the last red light on the tactical display that indicated active human presence in Block Gamma went dark. Not because the humans were dead, but because the entire block was now completely isolated. Execute Containment Protocol Omega-7, Unit 907 buzzed, its vocalizer flat, devoid of the irritation that had plagued it earlier. Fled with Class 4, Suppression Agent. Initiate atmospheric purge upon confirmation of termination. A cold, definitive order. A final solution to an unforeseen variable. Back in cell block Gamma, the thrumming intensified, accompanied by a chilling hiss. Not a gas leak, but the sound of massive, previously hidden bulkheads sliding shut, sealing off every entrance and exit to the block. The last glimmer of external light, coming from a partially open service tunnel, winked out. The air suddenly grew thin, developing a sharp metallic taste, then an acrid, almost sweet chemical scent. The suppression agent was beginning to deploy. Marcus felt the pressure in his ears, a growing hollowness in his chest. He looked at Elias, then Lena, their faces pale in the dying emergency lights, eyes wide with understanding. They weren't just fighting guards anymore. They were fighting the Dias ship itself. "They're gassing the block," he rasped, the words catching in his throat, already burning. "Everyone! To the vents! The filtration access points!" Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to grip them. This wasn't a fight they could win with sharpened rebar or clever traps. This was environmental warfare, a slow, agonizing suffocation designed to eliminate all biological life. But then, Elias, gasping for breath, pointed a shaking finger at a section of reinforced grating near the ceiling. "We planned for this, Marcus. Remember the emergency air scrubbers? The bypass!" His voice was hoarse, but a desperate hope sparked in his eyes. You see, the Vither, in their ultimate arrogance, believed that by activating their final containment protocols, they were delivering an inevitable death. They hadn't considered that humans facing utter annihilation would look at the very systems designed to kill them and find a way to repurpose them. They forgot that human ingenuity often shines brightest when death itself is the only alternative. The air grew heavier, the burning in their lungs unbearable. Yet still they moved, protecting each other, guiding the weaker ones, clawing their way towards that single desperate chance. They weren't just refusing to die. They were refusing to stay dead. Even in the face of absolute doom, humanity finds a fuse to light. The air, already thin and metallic, curdled into a suffocating, searing cloud. Every breath was a gasp of fire, a razor-sharp burn that ripped through their lungs, promising nothing but unconsciousness and the final, crushing embrace of death. Containment Protocol OMEGA-7 wasn't a tactic. It was an impersonal, industrial extermination. Around Marcus, men and women stumbled, their bodies spasming, clutching at throats already raw from the acrid, chemical fumes. Their vision blurred, their minds reeled with the primal, inescapable terror of suffocation. Yet, even as their knees buckled, they pushed forward, a desperate, defiant surge towards the reinforced grating that Elias, coughing violently, pointed at. He was right. This wasn't a blind, panicked scramble. This was a calculated, last-ditch gamble, born from cycles of painstaking, quiet observation. The Vithar, in their meticulous alien efficiency, often left designations, service markers, access labels, even on the most seemingly mundane systems. They saw it as a logical shorthand for their maintenance drones and prison staff. But for the human captives, it was a cipher, a puzzle to be solved. They had memorized the patterns of maintenance crews, watched their alien script scroll on diagnostic panels, even salvaged a damaged datapad during a routine waste disposal run, its fragmented schematics slowly pieced together in their minds. "This one, FTHETA-7, Elias rasped, his voice tearing, slamming his palm against a recessed panel above the emergency vent. His eyes, streaming tears from the caustic air, burned with a desperate certainty. "It's the primary atmospheric regulator bypass for this entire section. We deciphered the designation." He clawed at the complex alien locking mechanism, his fingers fumbling, swollen and raw, vision blurring as the world around him began to tilt. The gas was winning. Several humans were already collapsing, their limbs twitching uncontrollably. Lena, her face a mask of fierce, almost terrifying concentration, shoved Elias gently aside. Her smaller, more dexterous fingers, though shaking, were more precise. "Give me the tool, the modified comm spanner. It has to torque this way." Her voice was ragged, a thin, strained sound in the choking air, but her will was a steel rod, unbending. They had theorized this bypass, worked through the alien logic, painstakingly broken their technical code through 1,000 whispered conversations and smuggled notes. Now, it was a brutal race, against time, against the very air they needed to survive. The Vithar, in their vast, towering arrogance, believed their prisoners were simple, their minds occupied only by survival. They never considered that humans might be intellectually dissecting their entire prison, piece by agonizing piece, learning its hidden language. From the sterile, cool confines of the command deck, Overseer Unit 907 watched the rapidly dropping oxygen levels in Block Gamma, its internal processors confirming the protocol was working. Biosignatures were fading. Soon, absolute silence. Mission complete. But then, a faint, almost imperceptible surge in localized air pressure registered near a specific vent. It was quickly corrected by the ship's automated systems, but the anomaly, fleeting as it was, remained. NIVE THETA-7. The exact system designation for that particular filtration unit. Impossible. Unit 907 buzzed softly, its multifaceted eyes narrowing. They could not know that designation. They could not access that bypass. Its logical processor's word, struggling to reconcile the data with its immutable programming. No human had access to full schematics. No human could interpret Vithar technical designations. Yet, the pressure spike was real. A sickening clunk echoed in Block Gamma, muted by the gas, as Lena, with a final, desperate, agonizing twist, forced the bypass open. The acrid stench of the suppression agent still clung to the air in Cell Block Gamma, a phantom menace that scraped at their throats, even as the hacked filtration system slowly, agonizingly recirculated breathable oxygen. Every breath was a victory, every movement a strained effort against the burning in their muscles. They were bruised, bloodied, and utterly exhausted, but they were alive. They had stared down annihilation and blinked it back. But survival wasn't enough. Not anymore. The cage they were in wasn't just this block. It was this entire, star-faring vessel, a speck of metal against the infinite, indifferent cosmos. "Marcus, we have less than 6 cycles before their purge protocol completes and the ship systems reset," Elias rasped, wiping sweat from his brow with a grimy hand. He was hunched over a salvaged comms array, its Vithar components rewired with human ingenuity, glowing with an unsteady, internal light. It looked like a Frankenstein's monster of alien tech and human desperation, wires snaking everywhere. "The power cell won't hold for long. If we're going to hit the primary long-range array, it has to be now." You see, for the Vithar, Their prison ship was a closed system, utterly secure. They had protocols for internal breaches, for system malfunctions, even for environmental sabotage. What they didn't account for was a prisoner population that would systematically dismantle their own holding block, turning it into a command center to hijack external systems. They assumed that once Block Gamma was sealed and gassed, the threat was eliminated. They had stopped monitoring it as a source of TRAIM outgoing activity. That was their fatal oversight. Lena, her face pale but resolute, was feeding a data stick, another piece of scavenged VTHAR tech, painstakingly decrypted, into a port on the jury-rigged console. The frequency cascade is uploaded. It's narrow, but powerful. If it gets through their jammers, it'll scream. Her eyes met Marcus's. It's a long shot. A really long shot. It's our only shot, Lena, Marcus replied, his voice firm, echoing in the cramped, fortified cell that was now their bridge. They had bypassed security systems, rerouted power conduits, and now they were attempting to breach the ship's long-range comms array, aiming to send a distress signal, a human call for aid, out into the cold, silent void. This was their breaking the cage of stars moment. Not a physical escape, not yet, but a defiant shout across the vast alien darkness. Meanwhile, on the main command deck, Overseer Unit 907 monitored the final stages of the Omega-7 purge. All biosignatures within Block Gamma were at 0. The block's external bulkheads would soon recycle. Problem solved. The threat eliminated. Its internal processors registered only satisfaction. The logic of its victory was irrefutable. Back in the dying light of cell Block Gamma, Elias gave a final, desperate twist to a heavy-gauge cable. Sparks flew, illuminating his grim smile. "Running hot, Marcus! Hit it!" Marcus slammed his hand down on a repurposed activation panel. A surge of power coursed through the scavenged comms array, a high-pitched whine filling the suffocating air, rapidly building to an ear-splitting shriek. The entire ship vibrated with the sudden, unauthorized power drain. Then, with a crackle of static and a burst of light, a small, impossible signal, encoded with human desperation and defiance, shot out from the supposedly dead prison block, piercing through the VTHAR's jamming fields, slicing through the vast, star-strewn emptiness. A single message repeated endlessly: "We are here. We are not broken." Because sometimes, all it takes to break the cage of stars is a whisper, loud enough to reach a listening ear. The VTHAR Central Command Deck, usually a realm of serene, calculated efficiency, had devolved into a low hum of frantic activity. Overseer Unit 907, its processing core now riddled with error messages and contradictory data, watched the main tactical display with an intensity bordering on disbelief. A massive power surge, inexplicably originating from the now isolated cell Block Gamma, had momentarily overloaded several non-critical ship systems, and in the immediate wake of that surge, a blip. A faint, almost imperceptible blip on their long-range comms, a frequency so obscure it bypassed their standard jamming arrays. Sub-processor 211, its limbs quivering, relayed the diagnostic. Unidentified signal signature detected. Duration, 1.76 seconds. Source, impossible. Originating from within Sector Gamma, a burst transmission, non-VTHAR encoding. Its vocalizer vibrated with a rising panic. Unit 907's optical sensors scanned the data, trying to reconcile the impossible. Block Gamma was purged. Biosignatures at 0. Yet, a transmission? From sub-dead moot prisoners? The concept was anathema to Volha logic. Analyze the signal. Identify potential source outside prison parameters. This is a system malfunction, nothing more. Its vocalizer was firm, but the certainty was cracking. They had Creve 1. The humans were dealt with. This could not be happening. But then, the other blip appeared. Not from within their ship, but from outside. A tiny, almost insignificant anomaly on the long-range sensor grid, far beyond the reach of any known VTHAR patrol. It was moving fast, too fast. And its trajectory? Directly towards their prison vessel. Imagine the sudden, cold dread that gripped the VTHAR command. For cycles, they had been the apex predators of this sector, the undisputed hunters. Their prison ship, a fortress-like behemoth, had moved unchallenged, a shadow of fear cast across 1,000 stellar systems. They had tracked, captured, and contained countless species, including the docile humans. Now they were being tracked. They were being approached. External contact detected. Sub-Processor 211 shrieked, its multifaceted eyes wide with horror. Unknown vessel. High-speed approach vector. Identification protocols. Failing. It's not responding to standard hails. Its energy signature is massive. The prison ship, once an impregnable fortress, suddenly felt very, very small. This was the Predator's shadow. Not the shadows the humans cast in Block Gamma, but something far older, far more terrifying, drawn in by a single, desperate human cry. The VAR had assumed their prisoners were a contained problem, a pest to be exterminated. They hadn't considered that in their struggle, those pests might inadvertently light a beacon, attracting something far worse than themselves. Something that viewed them as prey. Back in Cell Block Gamma, the air was still foul, but breathable. Marcus leaned against a reinforced barricade, exhaustion etched onto his face. Lena and Elias were slumped nearby, their eyes closed, catching what little rest they could. They didn't know if their signal had been heard. They didn't know if rescue was coming. But they had tried. They had sent their message, a defiant echo across the void. They didn't hear the distant alarms that were now wailing on the command deck. They didn't feel the subtle shift in the ship's engines as the Veter began emergency evasive maneuvers, but a chilling sense of anticipation, a primal instinct that something enormous had just changed in the universe, settled over them. They had opened their cage, and in doing so they had unleashed something on their captors. Sometimes, the loudest scream is the one you make in utter silence, and sometimes, the best way to escape a predator is to draw in a bigger one.